Welcome to Stand With Us TV Live. Stand With Us works around the clock, supporting Israel and fighting anti-Semitism. Thank you for joining us. We have a great show for you today. Our guest is Andrew Pessin. Andrew is a professor of philosophy at Connecticut College and campus bureau editor at the Algemeiner. He is the author of numerous books, including The Jewish God Question, Anti-Zionism on Campus, the University, Free Speech, and BDS, and 3 novels. His newest novel, Nevergreen, is an academic satire that examines campus cancel culture and its impact on the Jews. In a previous life, he portrayed the genius on the David Letterman show. So welcome, Andrew. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Roz, for having me. I really do appreciate the opportunity.
So people are talking about cancel culture, and why don't we begin by defining it? Can you talk a little bit about what this means, cancel culture?
Sure. Campus cancel culture seems to be all the rage the last few years. An organization called the National Association of Scholars maintains a database, and they count over 180 cases of campus cancellation over the last 5 years or so. So it's a real phenomenon, and I'm sure many of the viewers are familiar with the general process. So it might go something like this. A particular professor or perhaps an invited speaker says or writes something that riles the roost, that seems to go against whatever the reigning orthodoxy is, and then outrage ensues. And that outrage can take different forms depending on the details. If it's a campus speaker coming to visit, there can literally be sometimes mob scenes and protests. If it's a professor, there can also actually be some mob scenes and protests around the administration. There's always some online component, so there might be some petition going around calling for condemnation, calling for disinviting the speaker if it's a speaker, calling for sanction or even termination if it's a professor. And these petitions, they go viral, they go around the world, they get hundreds or thousands of signatures, they get all sorts of news coverage. Typically, the person being targeted is doxxed one way or another. There might be a public figure, and if their information gets out, they'll get horrible email, including death threats. And eventually the university will typically put out a fairly lame statement about academic freedom or freedom of speech, but at the same time often will then condemn the speaker by saying that person's views don't align with the values of this institution. And then sometimes the outcomes can be different. There are cases of termination, professors being fired, certainly being suspended and being disciplined as a result of these campaigns. And even if you do manage to survive the campaign with your sanity and job and reputation intact, you've learned the lesson. It's a really miserable experience, and many of the people who suffer it, they're not going to speak up again. They're going to start censoring and silencing themselves. And certainly the people who've witnessed this campaign, who maybe even agree with the outrageous proclamations, or at least are willing to entertain them and think about them, they learn the lesson too, that just keep quiet, keep your head down, because nobody wants to go through this. So to be canceled is to have a public campaign, usually very intense campaign, publicly shaming you and typically calling for some sort of punishment against you. And that's the phenomenon that we've been seeing really increasingly over the last 5 or 6 years on campuses.
It sounds frightening. We have seen it. Do you have like some sort of an answer to all of this? Because it really can be done to nearly anybody for anything.
That's a great question. You're going right to the $1 million question. So let me say a little bit first before I get to some thoughts about what would be the way to respond to these sorts of campaigns. We see them in general on campuses against typically conservative voices, first and foremost, people like Charles Murray or Ben Shapiro, if they're invited to come to a campus. It's no secret that many campuses, the majority of liberal arts campuses, tend to be very strongly left-leaning or progressive, but overwhelmingly so. And so conservative voices are just apt for cancellation. There was a particularly, I thought, terrible case at University of Central Florida earlier this year, Charles Negi. But cancellation can also attack even some left-leaning people. So, for example, at Evergreen State College, many people will be familiar with the case of Brett Weinstein there. He was a pretty typical liberal sort of person, but the extreme progressive wing of that campus undertook a few actions that he objected to, and he was subjected to cancellation. And indeed, even going beyond the campus a little bit, this phenomenon, there was the case of April Powers, I believe her name was. She was the equity and inclusion officer for the Society for Children's Books, who dared to put out a statement condemning anti-Semitism, and believe it or not, got canceled for that. So that's the general phenomenon. More particularly, of course, and this is my concern, and I'm sure StandWithUs' concern, is it's the Jews who are being targeted for cancellation, in particular, Jews who stand up for Israel or care about Israel or support Israel. And I can give you lots and lots of examples over the last several years. Let me maybe go through a few of them. So in the Jewish or Zionist arena, in student governments, for example, over the past couple of years, it's increasingly the case that such students, there are campaigns of either harassment or outright impeachment, or even just campaigns to prevent them from serving on student government positions. So there was the well-publicized case of a young woman named Rose Rich at USC this past year, Max Price at Tufts University, and this follows a sequence of other cases at UCLA, Stanford. In fact, the young woman at Stanford, who they tried to run a campaign to prevent her from being on student government, she ended up, I met her through a StandWithUs event, and ended up documenting her case in a book I put out a few years ago, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. So there's this whole series of cases where Jewish students, in particular, let's call them Zionist students, are being forced out of student government positions. There is a general campaign called anti-normalization. This is undertaken by and moved by Students for Justice in Palestine, which is a widely prevalent anti-Israel group that has chapters, they say, on some 200 North American campuses and elsewhere. And this idea of anti-normalization is exactly an instance of cancellation, as we've been talking about it. So, for example, what anti-normalization means is that they refuse to normalize anything related to Israel or anybody who's supportive of Israel. And normalizing such people means literally conversing with them, working with them, treating them as human beings. So a couple of years ago at New York University, 53 different student groups signed an open pledge agreeing to boycott the two Zionist groups that happened to be on campus, literally not talk to them, certainly not sponsor anything with them, have no dialogue with them, etc. Or at Williams College this past year, the student government tried to prevent a Zionist student group from forming. There have been a number of cases where SJP has run movements to get campus Hillels either shut down or defunded or marginalized in various ways. So all of these are instances of Jewish students, in particular Zionist students, who are being subject to cancellation on campus. And lastly, and I could go on indefinitely on this subject, but lastly, those who followed events of this a couple of months ago, the conflict in May between Israel and Hamas, if you follow the academy there, I wrote an article called Academics for Hamas, because literally while Hamas was raining thousands of rockets on the heads of Israeli civilians, and while Jews were being physically assaulted in the streets of major cities in North America and in Europe, Chabad houses were being vandalized and burned, as well as Hillel houses, various campuses. While Jews are under attack literally everywhere, the academy, universities erupted in protest against Israel. They put out literally hundreds, well over 300 different statements with affiliations at major universities. There was one from Harvard, there was one from Yale, there were one from major British universities, etc. And these statements weren't merely siding with Palestine, but the Palestinian cause, but they were actively condemning everything about Israel, starting with Israel's attempts to defend itself. They were so stunningly one-sided hundreds of statements signed by literally tens of thousands of people. These are the professors that teach our students at campuses. There were some administrators, lower level administrators, such as officers of diversity and inclusion, and many, many student peers and many alums of these prestigious universities. They made it clear, and this is the summary of it: Zionism and therefore Zionists have no place on their campuses. This is their position. Hundreds of statements, tens of thousands of signatures. In short, Zionism itself is being canceled on campuses left and right. And make no mistake, when you demonize Israel, you are demonizing the campus Jews who support her. And when you make Israel toxic, as these academics do in these statements, you should really read them, they're stunning. When you make Israel toxic, you make your campus Jews toxic as well. And clearly, the next step after something is made toxic is elimination, literally. And that's what anti-normalization is, and that's what it is to get these students, kicked off of student governments. Jews are being eliminated from the public square in universities. So that's campus cancel culture in general. And of course, for me and many others, the primary target of concern are the Jews on campuses. So that doesn't answer the question. So do you still want to go there, or do you want to hold off on that thought?
It's okay. I wanna just say, Andrew, you have such an important voice, and you have been very courageous to speak out about all this in spite of the efforts to silence you and cancel you. Yeah. And it is a matter of courage these days, because actually we're talking about free speech. We're talking about one side not being able to tolerate a conversation about Israel from a Zionist perspective. We're talking about freedom of speech, really, for faculty. I mean, faculty wouldn't dare speak out if they're afraid of this cancel culture and this attack and this kind of, mass attack on one person. It's kind of like saying, shut up. You shut up, or we're going to make you shut up. We're going to threaten you. We're going to silence you until you're gone. It's an amazing thing that's going on, and that administrators would sit silently and not speak up more about this is kind of incredible. But I want to thank you personally for your voice and for being so courageous. Talking about something that may be unpopular. I also want to say that there are many people watching from all over the world, and they are not all Jews.
Yeah.
We have way too many people on our social media platforms, that join us all the time, every day, literally. So I want to say that, welcome everyone. The people that are pro-Israel, that are Zionist, and that are not Jewish. We have so many friends and allies, and this may be a time when all of you need to be more engaged and talk about how you feel. And yes, it does take courage. It does take courage. But Andrew, back to you. Shall we talk a little bit about your newest book? Because I know you've got other books, and I'm sure we'd like to. There it is. Nevergreen. It's a satire, and we'd love to hear about it. So tell us, please.
Thank you, Roz, and I appreciate the things you just said. You raised at least 4 or 5 great points in just those last couple minutes. So I'd like to just mention or talk about a couple of them, and then of course I would love to talk about my book at whatever length you will give me. Thank you for the compliment. It does take courage. I don't know how much courage that I have, but what I do know, I've had my sort of own experience in the field, and I've sort of seen firsthand how miserable the cancel culture can be. I should mention I'm also campus bureau editor for the Algemeiner, which is a terrific news outlet that covers issues of concern to Jews in Israel, and everyone should subscribe to the daily newsletter just to be informed on what's going on. And as campus bureau editor, part of my job is just to watch the campus scene and see the cancellation horror unfold. And it's really, really terrifying. And I know I resolved myself that that what many individuals need to be courageous the truly courageous people will do what they will do, even if they're completely alone, such as you mentioned that young fellow I know we've talked about, Hussein Abu Bakr, with his wonderful book, Minority of One, right? You may be the only person with that opinion, and it really takes courage to stand up for that opinion. To help empower the many people, I know there are many people on campuses who really are okay with Israel and okay with the Jews, but they're cowering in submission because it's so terrifying. To empower those people, which, as you pointed out, we need to do, right? We need to energize them, empower them. It's important each individual who speaks up, stands up, speaks out, helps empower someone else, right? To know that you're not alone is the most empowering thing of all. And so I urge certainly all watchers, anyone who doesn't hate Israel, to stand up against this cancel culture phenomenon, because that will empower more and more people to do so. You're also right that administrators, well, put it this way, cancel culture is really an attack on the institution of the university. It's an attack on the norms and ideals of what a university, I think, and many people think, should be. What hasn't been appreciated is the fact that the BDS movement, for example, the anti-Israel movement on campus, which certainly traces back decades, but specifically the BDS form of it, the boycott, divestment, sanctions form of it, really traces back to 2001, the Durban UN conference, which is about to be commemorated in the next few weeks by certain nations that aren't boycotting it. But that's when the call to really marginalize and isolate and boycott Israel went out to the campuses. And, in that classic case where Jews are the canary in the coal mine, I think there have been lots of bystanders who've watched the BDS movement. Maybe they don't agree with it, but they're not too opposed to it. It's pretty neutral. There's certainly plenty of such people. But, the BDS movement, it wasn't about them and didn't apply to them. So it was fine just to sort of watch it and to stay out of it. But of course, what's so clear now, and should have been clear all along, is that BDS, as the front wave of this campus cancel movement, as an epitome of campus cancellation, is an attack on, not just on Jews, it's definitely an attack on Jews, but it's also an attack on the university. And you put it very, very nicely. It's the attack on free speech. At least the ideal of a university, maybe universities once were this, but certainly this was the ideal of the university, is that the university itself is a neutral institution, and people with different points of view sort of come into the forum and have reasonable civil debate, and they try to acquire truth through that. That's, a sketch of the ideal of the university. But what's crucial for the advancement of knowledge and the obtainment of truth is precisely that the institution itself be a neutral forum. Because if the institution has a pony in the race, if the institution has a position, then it's no longer a neutral ground on which the opposing point of view can have a fair and reasoned deliberation. And what the BDS movement has been trying to do in the modern iteration of it for 20 years now, they've been trying to take over the institution as a whole and have the institution have a position. And if the institution has a position, that suppresses dissenting views and takes away the possibility of serving as a neutral forum and therefore of advancing knowledge. So BDS is an attack not just on Jews, but on the institution. And for some reason, administrators have not appreciated that to the degree that they should. So you're absolutely right. Administrators need to be more vocal, defending the university from BDS in particular and from cancel culture in general. So I wanted to add those few comments about your wonderful insights. And now I'm happy to talk about the book. Are we ready?
Before you do,
okay.
Before you talk about the book, I want to make a couple of comments. One, going to this issue of the pony in the race.
Yeah.
I really don't think people are neutral. Not writers, not administrators. They may act neutral because it's the path of least resistance, but I don't think anybody is neutral. To not say something is saying something.
Yeah.
And but you're right. It is an attack on the university if the university cannot be a place where, there's a cafeteria of ideas and everybody can participate. Oh no, only some people can participate. So this is extremely problematic. And it's an attack, as I said earlier, it's an attack on free speech.
Yeah.
And the freedom of ideas, the exchange of ideas.
Yeah.
So, people will have, even if people dislike Israeli policies, or if people love Israeli policies, certainly the greater good is a neutral place where people can have a safe exchange.
Yeah,
I mean, that's just common sense, right?
So you would think. And indeed, if the BDS movement, just stopped calling for, let them come into a university and make the case against Israel as powerfully as they can, following sort of the norms of reason and evidence. And, we may not like it because we disagree with it. And we may even find it hateful because it's sometimes, it's sometimes hard to find that exact line between reasonable critique and expressions of hate. But when they call for action, when they call for a student government and they call on a university to boycott and divest, they're changing the game entirely. And that's the point at which they've crossed all reasonable lines. The student government is supposed to represent all the interests and needs of all the students on campus. But if the student government has a political position on something like this, then they're automatically disenfranchising those people who don't share that position. And it's just, to me, obvious that student governments should not have political positions, right? That's just not their business and their raison d'etre. And universities should not have political positions either. So that's why I say when they're calling for boycott, this goal that they should take over the institution and make the institution have a political position, to me, is really anathema to the purpose of a university. So that's yes, why.
It is anti-Semitic because it targets only Israel.
Right.
But there is not a university, just to be clear to everybody listening, there is not one university that has joined the boycott against Israel. As a matter of fact, quite the opposite. There are a lot of exchange programs. There are a lot of partnerships. So, there isn't anything like that. But they try. The anti-Semites on campus will continue to try to push their voice at the exclusion of anyone else's voice, clearly, with the campus cancel culture. Yeah. So let's get back to your book.
Oh, did you ask me to put it up on the screen again? Yeah. Okay, so my latest venture, a little bit of background. A few years ago, I published this book with a colleague from Fordham, Jerome Benatar, Anti-Zionism on Campus, the University Free Speech and BDS. And that was an attempt, this was in 2018, to document, it's a collection of narratives from faculty members and students to document what it's like basically to be targeted for cancellation as a supporter of Israel, or in some cases, as long as you're not anti-Israel, you're targeted for cancellation. You don't even have to be such a big Zionist to be targeted for cancellation when the general atmosphere really wants this, doesn't want neutrality, won't accept neutrality, that you have to be anti-Israel. So that really opened my eyes, putting that book together. That was when I really understood clearly and viscerally that anti-Zionism basically is anti-Semitism. So you can be nuanced in some ways, but it was clear to me in putting that together. And it also became clear to me that anti-Zionism as it manifests on campus is cancellation, right? So cancel culture has been rising over these last few years. And that was sort of the moment I realized, oh, anti-Zionism, this has been going on. The Jews are the canary in the coal mine. First, they came for the Jews in this particular case. Now they're coming for sort of all conservative voices and more. So that opened my eyes. But now the question is, and this ties into your earlier question, so what do we do in response? How do we answer this? And that's an enormous question, partly because two main reasons it's so enormous is it's a battle that's being fought on many different fronts simultaneously, and I'll say more about that in a second. And we are just grossly outnumbered. By we, I mean the Jews and maybe even sane persons more generally in the campuses these days. So in terms of being outnumbered, I know I've shared this statistic with you before, but I believe Gigi Hadid, the Palestinian anti-Israel celebrity influencer, has 4 times as many followers on Instagram as there are Jews in the world. So just that number alone sort of tells you where we are. And indeed, Jews on North American campuses, Jews in North America are under 2% of the population. And on North American campuses, some campuses they're overrepresented, but they either don't exist or in vanishing small numbers on most campuses. You've mentioned that the Jews are not entirely alone, so maybe we'll come back to that thought. But I do know that many Jews feel quite alone on campuses because these using this concept of intersectionality, the idea that all oppressions are connected, the intersectional coalitions that are formed on campuses, all of the progressive student groups, all of the ethnic student groups on campuses are just aligned against the Jewish groups. I mentioned NYU 53 student groups agreeing to boycott the Zionist student groups on campus. So many Jewish students feel quite alone. Question now is, so how do we battle back, given that we are outnumbered and we're alone and there's many fronts? So what are the different fronts? We have to fight on every front, right? We have to, because otherwise we yield. So there are individual scholars who are taking on the reigning orthodoxies, which are, whether it's things like critical race theory or intersectionality or anti-Zionism, just to name several. So there's individual scholars who are either powerful enough or tenured enough and brave enough that can just take those on head on, and that's important. There are various organizations that maybe aren't about particular orthodoxies per se, but are fighting the whole idea of academic orthodoxy, i.e. therefore free speech and academic freedom and diversity of opinion, diversity of views. Organizations such as the acronyms are FIRE and FAIR and ALA, I think, or something like AFA, Academic Freedom Alliance, something like that. So they're doing something good. They're trying to maintain the university as a neutral institution and push back against orthodoxy. What I thought I would do with this is a different idea. Those things are important, and I'm glad that people are working on them, and I do contribute to them a little bit as well. I decided to write a novel instead, for a number of reasons. First of all, it's a different front. It's a different way of approaching the issue. Fiction has the capacity in some ways to be more accessible and reach more people. It's wonderful to follow some of the heavy hitters who are battling the orthodoxies, people like John McWhorter or Glenn Lurie, just a couple that come to mind. There's many others, but that's hard work, and you have to be intellectually inclined yourself. Fiction is more accessible and can reach more people. And in particular, I chose satire. So I'm satirizing sort of the liberal arts campus and campus cancel culture in this book. Because satire, first of all, can be fun and funny. I do try to have a sense of humor in the book. And so far, many of the reviewers seem to be agreeing, although I guess they wouldn't have said that. They wouldn't have reviewed it unless they agreed that the book is humorous. I'm inspired by, there was a left-wing thinker, Saul Alinsky, wrote a famous book called Rules for Radicals. I think it was in the 70s. And rule number 4 was that use ridicule. Ridicule is the most potent weapon, because ridicule can, if it's well done, can be hard to answer. So choosing satire, sort of ridiculing this moment, the goal is to really point out how corrupted and unhinged cancel culture is. From within, many of the practitioners think that they are reasonable people fighting for human rights and social justice, and that they're opposed to hate. But in fact, what cancel culture is, in my view, is essentially an out-of-control mob who are driven by deep hatreds themselves. And the best way to bring that out, I thought, was by satire and by fiction. And lastly, my 2018 book, The Anti-Zionism on Campus, as I said, is documenting. It's a nonfiction book documenting various cancel campaigns against Israel-supporting people. But I really wanted to bring out the subjectivity of it. What does it feel like to be targeted for a cancel campaign? And it doesn't feel very good. That's a euphemism there. And the best way to do that, I thought, is by fiction. So you follow the travails of this individual character. He's basically a physician in midlife. He's from outside the campus. I wanted to get across what the campus looks like to people outside it, because when you're in the bubble, it may all seem normal and rational and acceptable. But when you're outside that bubble, you can realize just how crazed and unhinged it is. So he's a midlife physician. By a chance circumstance, he gets this invitation to come give a lecture at this fictional college called Nevergreen. And we'll talk about the title in just a second. This is The Path Not Taken. It's sort of a dream of a lifetime. He always sort of wanted to be an academic. So he comes to this very strange, secluded island campus of Nevergreen College. And as it turns out, nobody shows up for his talk, which is also not that uncommon. No one shows up for his talk, but that doesn't stop it from becoming the center of a whole firestorm of controversy on campus with, as the publisher's description puts it, potentially fatal consequences, not to give away any spoilers there. And so by choosing this fictional account, this satirical account, I'm trying to show again just how unhinged and out of control and really driven by hatred is this campus culture campaign. As far as the title, Nevergreen, so I'm sure some of your listeners get the illusion. And I think I mentioned right earlier, Evergreen State College was the site, I think in 2017, of a particularly egregious cancel campaign. Had nothing to do with Jews or Israel. But in any case, that got a lot of news attention. So Nevergreen is obviously an allusion to Evergreen. I should mention the book is not about Evergreen State College or what happened there. It's about cancel culture in general. But the title is definitely meant to sort of point your head in that direction.
Do you think that by writing this book, it will make people think twice about all of this and maybe, get busy trying to cancel culture?
Right. That's a great question. What I aspire to, and I am way too humble to imagine I could fulfill this aspiration, but in my opinion, just about the greatest movie ever made was Spinal Tap, or This Is Spinal Tap. I don't know if you ever saw that. When was that? In the 80s, I think. It is maybe the first of this genre of mockumentary, and it was like a fake documentary about this fictional heavy metal band. And, I should mention that for a long time, I was a student of film, and I like to think I have fairly sophisticated tastes in film. And even so, I say Spinal Tap was perhaps one of the greatest movies ever made. And what was so effective about Spinal Tap, I saw a documentary some years later, like a regular documentary about the heavy metal scene. And more than one heavy metal rocker said something like the following in this documentary. They said, after Spinal Tap changed everything for the heavy metal scene. The satire caught them so perfectly that they could no longer just do what they were doing because they were totally self-conscious and self-aware of how Spinal Tap they were being when they were doing their thing. So it actually changed, I guess, the atmosphere of heavy metal life, whatever that means. And that would be my aspiration. Like I said, I can't hope to compare myself to Spinal Tap except unfavorably. But if the satire is effective, maybe more people will realize as a cancel campaign is beginning and underway, they can realize, oh my God, we think we're being driven by, concern for human rights and social justice. And we are, people who hate, right? We're anti-hate and anti-racism. But maybe if the satire is effective, and should this book, manage to get read by enough people and make an impact, it will be clearer to more people that they're an unhinged, out of control mob that are driven by hate as opposed to being anti-hate. That would be the goal, and that would be the aspiration, to really make cancelers self-conscious in such a way that maybe they scale back the canceling.
I suppose they imagine that if there's enough of them that they don't need to worry about their own personal reputations, or they don't even need to think too hard. They're just following like sheep.
Yeah.
Go get him. Go get that one.
Yeah.
Go get Andrew Pessin. Let's go get him. And I know that you have suffered, and you mentioned it earlier, you have suffered in the past with cancel culture.
Well, the way it does typically operate, there's, and this is very true for like the Jewish Zionist issue as well. On any given campus, yeah, obviously it varies from campus to campus, and from time to time, it depends which students are enrolled at any given period, right? But very typically, there'll be a small core group of what I'll call, certainly real Israel haters and probably real Jew haters amongst them as well. And that group will be pretty small. But precisely because this anti-Israel ideology has hooked itself into, via intersectionality, all the progressive movements on campus. And they make the case, this is a slogan of theirs, right, that progressivism includes advocacy for Palestine. This is their expression, right? Precisely because of that, they make it the case that anyone who cares about progressive causes, and this is the significant majority of students on many major campuses, certainly liberal arts colleges, has to be anti-Israel. So that very small core group of genuine haters who are almost certainly, Jew haters, anti-Semites, bigots, etc., they managed to energize and bring along a much larger population of people who may not be, Israel haters in their hearts, or certainly not Jew haters in their hearts, but because they've been so effective at linking progressivism with their cause, they've got this much larger population that comes along with them that get energized. And I know I try to get that across in the book by having, there's really one key student who runs this campaign, and she just manages to convince everybody that this poor, I don't know what's a good word, Schmendrick, I think is a good word. The main character is a very blah, neutral guy, really as inoffensive as a person could be or should be. But this one student manages to convince everybody, in essence, that he's the face of hate, that he represents hate with a capital H. And precisely because they want to hate hate so badly, they're convinced that he's the face of hate. They don't need any information. Remember, nobody showed up for his talk. It really didn't matter what he said. And what he said was nothing, really, right? But because they so badly want to hate hate, and they've now been informed by this one ringleader, young woman, that he's the face of hate, they just join in this campaign. They go get him. They want to go target him, right? And I do think that captures the dynamics of many cancellation campaigns, certainly as they concern Israel and Jews on campus. There's a small core group, and they energize the rest who may not share their core beliefs, but they stand for human rights and social justice, and this core group has convinced them that means they have to stand against Israel.
So this is what it means when people don't think for themselves.
Yes, in one sentence, that's perfect, right? That's right. I can't add to that other than to affirm it, right? That's exactly right. The majority of students here are not thinking enough for themselves. And that's what happens. So I guess I can add to it. That's what happens when, you get a mob mentality. One particular scholar was referring to a particular cancel case and looking at the mob, and he wrote something very beautiful. He was trying to reason with the mob to get them off this cancel case. And at one point he said he realized you can't reason with a mob, right? You can't, because once it's a mob, once you've got groupthink, more is going on than rational considerations and rational deliberations. You can't reason in a mob. And what he said, what you have to do is wait for the mob to stop being a mob and then hope they'll come to their senses, right? And that's what's happening when a cancel campaign is happening. It's a mob. And the whole idea of a mob is itself antithetical to what a university should be. Each individual mind or brain in that university should be thinking for himself or herself or their self and figuring out their own conclusions. And as soon as you hook onto the group, it's like you've turned in your card as a rational person, and now you're just going along for the ride. And that's the end of the university, right? That's not what a university is for. And that's what we are seeing increasingly. It started in the last 20 years with the Jews. BDS was exactly that. And now I think it's just spread and grown. And, the hope is that as we fight back on every front, maybe my book will become a bestseller and change the national conversation. Let's make that happen. But, as we fight back, let's go back to fundamentals: free speech, freedom of thought, no groupthink, right? That's what a university, I think, should aspire to be.
So another title of your book could have been How a Mob Mentality Cancels Free Speech.
If it were a nonfiction book, that would have been the subtitle. Exactly. Exactly.
So we do have people all over the world watching, and I hope you're sending us questions. And I see that we do have some. So in a moment, I'm going to give you a chance to hear your questions be asked for the amount of time that we have left. So Andrew, this is all very, very fascinating and on everybody's minds, really, especially if you attend a university or if you work on a university campus. This is very much on everybody's minds now. And I once again call on everybody to find your courage and get together with friends and allies that may not be Jewish, but Israel is important to everybody. Israel should be important to people of different faiths and people of different backgrounds. It's a progressive place. It should be respected, and it is a light among nations. I mean, they just we've got Israelis now helping in Haiti. We've got Israelis helping all over the world with these disasters that come up in different countries. We actually have a lot of footage, great footage at Stand With Us on our Twitter and our Instagram and our Facebook. So I encourage everybody to stay with us, stand with us,
Sit with us too.
To be part of the movement of, supporting Israel, of learning more about Israel. It's not black and white. You don't just love Israel or hate Israel. There's a lot of in-between people. There's probably 80% of the planet that don't know and don't care. And listen, you guys, if you're watching right now, learn more. Yeah. Learn more about why this is so ridiculous and unreasonable, that there is only one side that is valid, and that is the anti-Israel side. So let's first, before we ask questions from our audience, tell us how the book is doing so far.
I'm optimistic. It had a very strong pre-order sales numbers, or so I'm told. It's very easily findable. It's certainly my own website, andrewpessin.com. People can find it. The link is available on Amazon. It will be available on Apple and all other forms of wherever you get your content. It should be available there. So we'll see. It would make a great book club selection for students who are interested in fighting cancel culture, right? Like this, I think it would be a good thing to do, like early in the school year. Get together with some friends, read the book, and talk about how you're going to fight cancel culture in general, and certainly from the perspective, I think you just put it beautifully. You don't necessarily have to be pro-Israel, but you have to be pro-learning about Israel. You have to be open to hearing the Israeli and Jewish perspectives on things, and you should fight on your campuses for the right to hear all opinions. And hopefully my book will help that.
I don't think this is just about Israel. I think it's about everything. I think it's about everything. I mean, people may disagree with just about anything. It happens to be targeting Jewish people and pro-Israel people a lot, but it's like they came for the Jews first. This could be about anything.
Yeah.
This literally could be about anything, and it will silence your free speech if you allow this to continue on your university.
Yeah.
It will silence everybody that whoever this group is or any group disagrees with, then they can mob you and get rid of your voice. And that cancels free speech, basically.
That's right.
So we have our first question here from Jordan, who lives in Los Angeles. I currently attend a small liberal arts college in the Pacific Northwest. I am pro-Israel. Do you have any advice for me on how I can engage in productive conversations with my peers?
That's a great question. I wonder if you're at Evergreen State College. And there are some very unpleasant places in the Pacific Northwest for Jewish Zionist students. So whoever you are, kudos to you. I always say first order of business whenever anyone asks me for practical advice, I say go to Stand With Us, right? Become affiliated with Stand With Us. Stand With Us has unbelievable resources. They have unbelievable support mechanisms. Found a chapter, Stand With Us, on your campus. That's the first step to be prepared and to educate yourself, and also to be empowered, because you're not alone. The scary thing is the scariest moment might be putting out that first call on your campus. Anyone want to come talk about Israel? Right? That's scary because you don't know what you're going to get. So I think that would be my initial and main practical advice. Further details really depend on each individual campus has its own conditions and its own people and its own strategies, etc. But being well informed and having a support network such as Stand With Us behind you are really the first two steps.
I just want to add to what you just said, that Stand With Us now has a legal department, which is big, and we actually have 250 pro bono attorneys across the country that want to help students and faculty and community members who are being bullied by this kind of mob mentality that we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes. And so contact us. Yes, do reach out. If you think that your rights have been compromised, reach out. And, when in doubt, reach out too. Like if you're not even sure, ask us. So yes, and plus we have a lot of strategy people on staff, and we have campus people on staff. We have resources. So we're there for you. We are there for you if you're a student, faculty, community member. We are there for you. So thank you, Andrew, for that. So anything else you want to tell us about your book? One person here, Emily in Brussels, is asking, is your book based on your own experience?
Let me say no to that question. My book is about cancel culture in general. We didn't talk much about it here, but it's all about the Jews, but it's secretly about the Jews. So, in fact, the word Jew or Jewish or its cognates doesn't appear at all in the book, and it's possible to read this book and not even know it has anything to do with the Jews. However, secretly, it's all about the Jews. And anyone who's interested, please feel free to email me, write me. You can contact me through my website, andrewpessin.com. I've actually written up the sort of the secret Jewish guide to Nevergreen, because there's all these clues about how it's all about the Jews, and it could be kind of fun. So no, it's not based on my own experience, beyond the fact that as campus bureau editor for the Algemeiner, I've been keeping a close eye on lots and lots of campuses. And so it's sort of an amalgam of what's going on a lot of campuses, with that special secret emphasis on the Jews.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you, everyone who's joined us. And Andrew, good luck with the release of your new book. We're very excited for you. And once again, thank you from all of us for being a voice on this issue, where there are not many at all. So good luck on every level. And we hope you'll come back and join us again soon.
Morales, thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you to Stand With Us. What this organization that you've created over the past 20 years is unbelievable. And if it didn't exist, we'd be just dead in the water. So, thank you for all you do, and I'm happy to come back anytime you want me to.
Thank you, Andrew, and shout out to our incredible international staff. You guys make everything worthwhile and make everything happen. So thank you all. Goodbye, Andrew, and we'll see you next time. And good luck again with the book.
Thank you so much.
That was so great and so enlightening. We're going to be taking a short break for the September Jewish holidays. So make sure that you tune into previous interviews like T.M. Garrett, Dumasani Washington, Ambassador Mark Regev, or many, many others. Go to StandWithUs.tv, where you can find a host of great video at no cost, any time of day. So we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you for standing with us, and shalom from Stand With Us.